Have you ever heard laughter in the silence of the early morning? Not a casual sound, but something deep, spine-chilling, that echoes in your mind even after it stops. Imagine if, while investigating the past, you awakened something that should never be touched. Something that is not just a memory, but a living nightmare. Today, in a forgotten corner of Chicago, someone took the first step into the unknown. The question is, how far would you go for the truth? And more importantly, could you survive it? Chicago, 2025. The streets seemed calm, but for Ethan, Hannah, Miguel, and Tara, this calm was just the surface of a city full of dark stories. The quartet, all eager content. Creators seeking fame had a new idea, an investigative documentary about the most infamous crimes in the city's history. The main theme, John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown. They knew the name still sent shivers down spines, and a well-done project could explode on the networks. "We have to start where it all happened," Hannah insisted, pointing to a map with a red cross. It was the location where Gacy's old house had been demolished decades ago. Nothing but an empty lot remained, but stories of bizarre sightings never ceased. "People love a good scare. We just need to make it real enough," added Ethan, the group's leader. However, something seemed off from the start. When they arrived at the site that night, a strange mist covered the ground, despite the dry weather of the day. Tara, more sensitive to the environment, hesitated. "It doesn't feel right. There's something heavy here." Miguel scoffed. "It's just your imagination. It's just an empty lot." As they set up their equipment, Ethan found something shallowly buried in the soil. A torn piece of colored fabric, stained with something that looked like rust or blood. He held up the object, staring at it with curiosity and slight discomfort. "It looks like part of a clown costume," he murmured. Suddenly a loud noise broke the silence. Something metallic had fallen in the distance. Miguel went to check, recording everything with his phone. He found only an old street sign lying on the ground, but when he turned around, he swore he saw a red balloon slowly floating in the darkness. "Hannah, did you leave this here?" he called out. There was no response. Upon returning to the group, the balloon was no longer there. "I saw a balloon," Miguel insisted, but the others laughed. "I think you're getting into the mood," Ethan joked. However, Miguel seemed shaken, his face pale and eyes restless. That night, each returned to their respective homes with plans to continue filming the next day. Ethan was reviewing the footage when something strange happened. In one of the scenes, as he focused on the mist in the distance, a shadow appeared that he didn't remember seeing before. It was humanoid, with a slightly hunched silhouette. But the most disturbing part was the gleam of the eyes. He paused the image, leaning closer to the screen. "But what is this?" Hours later, while everyone was asleep, a peculiar sound echoed in their homes, almost simultaneously. A low, muffled laugh, but unmistakably sinister. Each woke up with a start, convinced they were dreaming. But when they turned on the lights, they found something on the floor. A small red balloon, carefully placed next to their belongings. On the balloon, in black letters, it read, "Did you like the joke?" The next morning, the group met at their usual cafe, a small coffee shop on the west side of Chicago. The place, normally filled with the aroma of roasted coffee and the laughter of patrons, felt suffocating that morning. Everyone was visibly shaken, as if the previous night had left something more than just fatigue, an invisible shadow that followed them. Ethan had his hands in his pockets, his restless fingers folding and unfolding a piece of paper scribbled with ideas for the documentary. It was his way of pretending to be in control. Hannah had her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the table while she spun her coffee cup without drinking. Miguel looked the most affected, with deep dark circles under his eyes and slow movements, as if sleep had abandoned him. Tara didn't hide, her restlessness incessantly shaking one leg, as if she wanted to be anywhere but there. Ethan was the first to speak, breaking the heavy silence. "I need to ask, did anyone else receive a red balloon last night?" The impact of the question was immediate. Their gazes met with hesitation, but none of them denied it. Finally, Hannah broke the silence. "I did. In my room. My door was locked, but there it was, on the floor." She pulled out her phone and showed a photo of the balloon with the message they had all seen. "Did you like the joke?" Tara took something out of her jacket pocket and threw it on the table. The crumpled remains of the balloon she had received. "It was in my closet. I can't even imagine how it got in there." Her voice was tense, almost as if she were sharing a secret she'd rather keep. Miguel, who had remained silent until then, took his phone out of his pocket and showed the video he had recorded the night before while exploring the empty lot. "It's not just that. I saw something." He paused at a specific point in the recording. The video showed mist in the background, but for a brief moment, a shadow quickly passed by. "This wasn't there before." Ethan leaned in to see better. "Do you think that's someone?" Miguel shook his head. "I don't know, but it didn't look human." Hannah interrupted, her voice sounding like she was trying to hold back tears. "And the laughter, did you hear it? That horrible laughter. I can't stop hearing it in my head." The group nodded in silence. The laughter wasn't something easy to forget. It wasn't just a sound. It seemed like something that penetrated the bones, echoing even when the world was quiet. "Maybe it's just a coincidence," Ethan tried to rationalize, his voice sounding forced. "Or someone trying to scare us. We're dealing with a historical figure of terror. Maybe some Gacy fan found out about our plan." Tara interrupted him. "No, Ethan, this isn't some sick joke. It's something more." She paused for a moment, as if afraid to continue. "I feel it. There's something heavy about all this." That afternoon, they decided to return to the empty lot, partly to prove they were just being paranoid, but also to try to find something that explained the events of the previous night. However, when they arrived, everything seemed different. The place wasn't just empty, it seemed to be waiting for them. The chair was there, like an improvised stage, and around it floated several red balloons dancing in the wind for no apparent reason. Miguel grabbed Ethan's arm. This wasn't here yesterday." Ethan tried to keep his composure, but even he hesitated before pulling out the camera. "Let's record. It might be a prank, but we need to document everything." Tara took a few steps back, almost tripping. I don't want to be here, not again." Hannah approached her and held her hand. It was a small gesture, but full of meaning. "It's going to be okay. We're in this together." Her voice was calm, but there was a hidden tremor. Ethan approached the chair. He was determined not to let fear win. "Someone tying this here is easy," he said, trying to sound practical, but when he touched one of the balloons, it popped with a sound so loud that it made him step back. That's when they heard it. The laughter. It wasn't like the one from the night before. It was louder, clearer. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Miguel pointed to the ground next to the chair. "There's an envelope here." Ethan's name was written on it in a thick, uneven handwriting. Upon opening it, he found an old, a faded photo. In it, children laughed around a clown at a birthday party. The disturbing detail was the clown's gaze. Even in a still image, there was something wrong with his eyes, something alive, as if he were watching through the paper. Ethan swallowed hard, showing the photo to the others. This doesn't make sense." Hannah leaned in to see better and pointed to something in the corner of the photo. A chair, the same chair that was in front of them now. Miguel took a step back, his eyes wide. This isn't a coincidence." The tension in the air was almost palpable. Before they could decide what to do, Ethan's phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from an unknown number. He hesitated before opening it, but he did. On the screen, a short phrase flashed in red letters. "Welcome to the game. The first act is over." Each of them experienced nightmares so real that they woke up in a cold sweat. Hannah dreamed she was trapped in a room full of mirrors, where each reflection of her wore distorted clown makeup and laughed hysterically. Tara saw a tall man wearing a dirty clown suit, sitting at the foot of her bed, just watching. Ethan dreamed he was being suffocated by balloons that forced their way into his mouth and throat, while laughter echoed in the background. Miguel, however, had the worst dream. He was tied to the chair from the empty lot while someone forcibly painted his face. Upon waking up, Miguel found something in his room that made his blood run cold. The same clown makeup he saw in his nightmare was on the floor, carefully arranged next to another balloon. The next day, Tara didn't show up for their meeting. Worried, they went to her apartment, but the lights were off and no one answered the door. Ethan, forcing the lock, managed to get in. Inside, everything was in order, except for one thing. The wall of Tara's room was covered in red scribbles, forming a single word repeated dozens of times: smile. On the floor, the chair from the empty lot was knocked over, as if someone had fallen from it, but Tara wasn't there. Then Ethan's phone vibrated. A new message from an unknown number. Upon opening it, a video started playing. It was a recording of Tara sitting in the chair, her face pale and motionless. In the background, the laughter, the same laughter, and then the screen went black. The silence inside Tara's apartment was so oppressive that it seemed to scream. Ethan, Hannah, and Miguel stood in the bedroom, staring at the message on Ethan's phone as if it could leap off the screen. The video of Tara was too disturbing to be just a prank. She looked frozen, Hannah said, her voice choked. That look, the way she was sitting, it's not normal. Ethan tried to stay firm, but his hand trembled as he held the phone. Miguel was in shock, unable to speak. They decided to leave the apartment and go straight to the police station. However, on the way, something strange happened. Ethan's phone started ringing, a sharp and distorted sound that seemed to come straight from a nightmare. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. Don't answer, Miguel whispered. But Ethan had already swiped to answer. driven by a mix of fear and curiosity. "Hello?" His voice echoed nervously. For a moment, there was only silence. Then came the laughter, the same laughter, distorted and grotesque. "Did you like the video?" said a raspy voice, as if speaking was an effort. "You started the game, now you have to finish it." Ethan hung up immediately, but they all heard it. Hannah was pale, and Miguel started looking around, as if expecting to see someone watching. This is going too far," he said finally. "It's not just someone playing a joke, it's real." Back at the empty lot, now deserted, they decided to investigate. Ethan insisted they needed to find clues about Tara. It was the only place that made sense to return to, even though fear gnawed at them from within. The lot was as before, except for one new thing. There was a large standing mirror in the center, reflecting the streetlights in a macabre glow. "That mirror wasn't here," Hannah said, her voice low. They approached cautiously, while Ethan filmed. When they stood in front of the mirror, they noticed something horrible. Their reflections were distorted. Each of them appeared to be smiling, but their own faces were motionless. "No, it's not possible," Miguel stammered, taking a step back. But the reflections continued to smile, even as they moved away. And then, in the corner of the mirror, a new figure appeared. A tall clown with smeared makeup and eyes dark as bottomless pits appeared behind them in the reflection. They turned immediately, but the lot was empty. The laughter echoed again, this time seeming to come from the mirror. Before they could react, the lights of the nearby street lamp went out, plunging everything into darkness. Suddenly, something changed. When the lights came back on, Ethan and Miguel were alone. Hannah had disappeared. "Hannah!" Miguel shouted, looking around frantically, but she was nowhere to be seen. In the mirror, however, they could still see her, silently screaming while the clown placed a hand on her shoulder. Miguel was the first to smash the mirror with a rock, screaming in frustration, but instead of breaking normally, the mirror crumbled into pieces that seemed to melt as if made of a living substance. "She's trapped in there," Ethan said, trying to control his panic. "I don't know how, but she's trapped." That night, Ethan and Miguel tried to decipher what was happening. They researched reports of similar events, desperately looking for connections between Gacy, the empty lot, and what they were experiencing. They found something disturbing on an obscure forum, reports of other people who had seen a clown similar to the one Ethan had captured on film. Most of the reports ended with unexplained disappearances or mysterious deaths. A private message appeared on Ethan's computer screen from a user named Smile Always. He clicked, and the text read, "You've already lost 2. How many more are you willing to sacrifice? The game is simple. Follow the clues or you'll be next. You have until midnight." The clock showed 22:45. Time was against them, but the fear of losing someone else forced them to continue. Ethan received another message, this time with a photo of an old abandoned amusement park on the outskirts of the city. "That's where we have to go," he said. Miguel hesitated. "What if it's a trap?" "Of course it's a trap," Ethan replied, his eyes burning with determination. "But if we don't go, we'll never see Hannah or Tara again." At 23:32, they arrived at the park. The place was even more terrifying than in the photos. Rusty carousels creaked in the wind, and remnants of children's toys were scattered on the ground. In the center, there was a circus tent, lit by faint and flickering lights. They entered, both of their hearts pounding like a drum. Inside the tent, they saw something that made them stop in their tracks. The chairs were arranged in a circle, each one occupied by a mannequin dressed as a clown. At the center, a single empty chair with a note pinned to it. "It's your turn." The tent seemed alive, breathing with the slight movement of the fabric pushed by the wind. Ethan and Miguel advanced with heavy steps, the sand beneath their feet crunching like a warning. Around them, the mannequins dressed as clowns seemed to watch them, despite their motionless heads. The empty chair at the center with the note pinned to it seemed to pulse with threat. "I'm not sitting there," Miguel murmured, not taking his eyes off the seat. "This screams trap." Ethan agreed, but his attention was on the note. With trembling hands, he tore it off and read it aloud. "Welcome to the show. One of you sits or both disappear. Pogo doesn't wait." The familiar laughter echoed in the tent, but this time it was louder, reverberating like a macabre soundtrack. Ethan looked at Miguel. "If we don't do anything, we're dead." Miguel shook his head, refusing. "You don't get to choose what happens when you sit in that chair. What if that's what he wants? What if it's the end? And what if it's the only way?" "To save Hannah and Tara," Ethan countered, his words heavy with guilt and desperation. He advanced slowly, the empty chair seeming to grow as he approached. Finally, he sat down. For a moment, nothing happened. The tension in the air became unbearable, like the calm before a storm. Then, all the lights in the tent went out at once, plunging them into absolute darkness. When the lights came back on, Ethan was alone. The mannequins had disappeared, as had Miguel. The tent now seemed larger, its dark corners extending beyond what was possible. He looked around, calling for Miguel, but all he heard was the echo of his own voice. Suddenly, a giant screen descended from the ceiling, and a video began to play. It was Hannah, trapped in a small, claustrophobic room with walls stained red. She was crying, screaming for help, but there was no sound. Behind her, the clown appeared, Pogo, with his smeared makeup and empty gaze. He held something in his hands, a pocket watch that seemed to pulse like a heart. The screen went black, and a new message appeared in dripping red letters. "Time to laugh, Ethan. The truth is in the next act." Meanwhile, Miguel woke up in a place he didn't recognize. It was a long corridor with walls of distorted mirrors reflecting grotesque images of himself. His reflection was smiling, but his real face was frozen in terror. He tried to scream, but he couldn't. His voice seemed to have been stolen. As he walked, the laughter began, first low, then growing in intensity, echoing around him. He turned a corner and found a red door with the word "Smile" scrawled in white. He didn't want to enter, but he had no other choice. Back in the tent, Ethan felt the ground move. It was as if the tent itself was trying to swallow him. He heard Pogo's laughter growing closer. Suddenly a red balloon appeared from nowhere, floating towards him. On its shiny surface, a phrase was written. "You think you understand, but you haven't seen anything yet." The balloon popped and a piece of paper fell to the ground. Ethan picked it up and read, "It's your fault." Images began to flood his mind. He and the group months earlier, planning the documentary. He remembered how he had insisted it needed to be something intense, something people couldn't ignore. He had chosen Gacy as the theme, knowing it was risky, knowing the past could be dangerous. And then he understood. Pogo wasn't just a spirit or an entity. He was a reflection, a mirror of what morbid curiosity and greed could create. They had fed something, and now it was devouring them. A new door appeared in the tent, with bright light emanating from its edges. Ethan hesitated, but he knew he had no choice. He opened the door and entered. On the other side, he found Miguel. He was sitting in a chair, staring at a mirror, his eyes wide and a frozen smile on his face. Ethan tried to call out to him, but Miguel didn't respond. Pogo appeared in the mirror behind Miguel, laughing as he held another balloon. "You still don't get it, Ethan?" Pogo said with his raspy voice. "You're not the hero. You never were." Welcome to the end of the second act. The big show is just beginning. The door closed behind Ethan, and the laughter echoed again, so loud it seemed like the world itself was laughing at them. The sound of the door closing behind Ethan seemed to seal more than just the room. It was as if his fate was locked inside. The frozen smile on Miguel's face, reflected in the mirror in front of him, made Ethan uneasy. He tried shaking his friend, shouting his name, but Miguel seemed to be stuck in some kind of trance. In the mirror, Pogo continued to watch, motionless, but with eyes that seemed alive, attentive, gleaming with malice. "You think you can change something?" The raspy voice echoed through the room, although the mouth in the mirror did not move. "Let him go," Ethan shouted, his fists clenched. He didn't know if he was talking to a spirit, a hallucination, or something even worse. But fear was giving way to desperation. Pogo's laughter was softer this time, almost a whisper, but still full of mockery. "You wanted to play with the past. Now the past plays with you." Suddenly the mirror changed. Miguel's reflection disappeared, and in its place images of Hannah and Tara appeared, each in different but equally terrifying rooms. Hannah was sitting in a small cell, lit by a flickering lamp, while Tara seemed to be trapped on a slowly spinning carousel surrounded by clown mannequins. "Choose," Pogo said, his voice now cold and calculated. "You can only save one of them. The other, well, let's say they'll join the show." Ethan froze. "No, that's not fair," he shouted, but Pogo just laughed again. "Ah, dear Ethan, life was never fair and the show must go on." A timer appeared on the mirror, counting down from 3 minutes. Ethan began to panic, his eyes darting between the images of Hannah and Tara. He had no idea how to choose. Both were his friends, both trusted him, and now he was being forced to condemn one of them. Meanwhile, Miguel started to murmur something. Ethan turned quickly, realizing that his friend wasn't as unconscious as he seemed. "The chair," Miguel whispered almost inaudibly. "Everything starts and ends with the chair." The words seemed to make sense, although Ethan didn't know how. He looked around and saw the same chair they had found in the empty lot, now in the corner of the room, almost as if it had been waiting for him. He hesitated, but with the timer running out, he decided to take the risk. He approached the chair, sitting down slowly. As soon as his body touched the seat, the room went dark again. When the light returned, he was inside one of the rooms from the mirror. Hannah's cell. "Hannah!" Ethan rushed to her, but an invisible wall separated them. He could see her, but he couldn't reach her. Pogo's figure appeared in the background, his footsteps echoing. "Ah, Ethan, so predictable. You really think you can save her like this? You chose the harder path." Meanwhile, Tara, as Ethan was trapped in the room with Hannah, Tara's image in the mirror began to distort. The carousel sped up, and the mannequins around her started to move. They spun along with the carousel, their heads slowly turning towards Tara, while their laughter echoed. "Stop! Please!" Tara screamed, but the mannequins only moved closer. She tried to escape, but she was stuck on the spinning platform, her forced dance becoming more and more erratic. Pogo appeared in front of her, holding a balloon that seemed to pulse, as if it had a life of its own. "You should have stayed away," he said, leaning in towards her. Tara started to scream, but the sound was abruptly cut off when the carousel suddenly stopped. Back in Hannah's cell, Ethan looked around desperately, trying to find a way to break the barrier that separated him from his friend. He kicked, punched, but nothing worked. Then he noticed something on the floor, a clown makeup kit, the same one Miguel had found in his room. "Looks familiar, doesn't it?" Pogo mocked. "You used something like this, Ethan. Maybe not literally, but you painted fear onto people, made them the show. Now you're part of it." Ethan hesitated, but decided to use the makeup. As soon as he applied the paint to his face, he felt an unbearable pain in his head. His memories began to fragment, and voices from the past echoed. The discussions to make the documentary more shocking, their laughter as they joked about real horror stories. Suddenly, he was out of the cell. Hannah looked at him, scared, but alive. "How did you do that?" she asked. Ethan could barely respond. He knew there was more, that this was just the beginning of another game, but Tara was nowhere to be seen. Ethan grabbed Hannah's shoulder, trying to explain what he knew, but Pogo's face appeared again, this time on a nearby wall. "The third act is almost here, Ethan. You saved one life but lost another. Now, see what happens when the audience is not satisfied." The laughter started, again louder than ever, as the room crumbled around them. The world around Ethan and Hannah seemed to crumble, but not in a natural way. The walls collapsed as if made of burned paper, revealing only a dark, endless void. Pogo's laughter surrounded them, echoing from all sides, and amid the darkness, small lights began to blink. Not stars, but eyes. Hundreds of eyes watching their every move. Hannah grabbed Ethan's arm. "What's happening? Where are we?" Her voice was a whisper filled with panic. Ethan could barely respond, his mind spinning in a storm of guilt, fear, and confusion. I don't know, but we have to keep going." Suddenly, a void gave way to a new structure. It was a stage lit by old-fashioned spotlights that temporarily blinded them. At the center of the stage stood Pogo, holding a microphone in one hand and a black balloon in the other. Behind him, in a large, rusty cage, was Tara, unconscious, with her wrists tied and her face pale as wax. "Ladies and gentlemen," Pogo announced, his voice echoing like that of a circus ringmaster. "Welcome to the grand finale. You came for the show, and that's what you'll get. Today we'll see what happens when failed heroes face the weight of their choices." Ethan stepped forward, ignoring the dread that gripped him. "Let her go, Pogo. End this. End it." Pogo laughed, a distorted sound that seemed to shatter the very air around them. "Ending is for cowards. You want Tara back? Fine. But everything has a price, Ethan. Are you willing to pay?" The stage began to transform. The wooden planks beneath their feet turned into a floor of mirrors, reflecting Ethan and Hannah in different forms. As frightened children, as crying adults, And finally, as monstrous versions of themselves with grotesque clown makeup. The laughter echoed louder, and Ethan felt the floor pulling them down. "Look familiar?" Pogo mocked, pointing at the reflections. "You were once the audience. Now you're the performers. Show me something worthy of applause." Suddenly, Tara's cage began to descend. At the same time, a roulette wheel appeared in front of Ethan, with sinister words in each section: sacrifice, betrayal, redemption. The pointer spun on its own, while Pogo watched with enthusiasm. "It all depends on where it stops, Ethan," he said, grinning widely. "But here's the secret. It doesn't matter where the pointer lands. You're already doomed." Ethan screamed, trying to reach Tara, but an invisible barrier stopped him. Hannah, beside him, began to cry, but something in her expression changed. She looked at Ethan, desperation giving way to determination. "What if it's a psychological game? What if he's trying to make us lose on our own?" Ethan paused, considering her words. Pogo tilted his head, as if he had heard enough. He snapped his fingers, and the lights around them began to flicker frantically. "Time is a luxury you don't have, kids. The wheel will stop. Choose who will be the sacrifice." The silence was broken by a single sound. The pointer on the roulette wheel stopped at sacrifice. Ethan knew what it meant. He looked at Hannah, and she shook her head frantically. "Don't do it. It's not real. It's what he wants." "And what if it's the only way to end this?" Ethan replied, his voice filled with resignation. He approached the roulette wheel, looking directly at Pogo. "I'm responsible for this. Let the others go and take me." Pogo laughed, but this time there was something different in his tone. "You really think it's that easy, Ethan? You're not here because you're responsible. You're here because you're the coward who never wanted to face the consequences." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. Before he could react, Pogo snapped his fingers again, and the floor beneath Hannah opened. She fell into an endless pit, her scream disappearing into the darkness. "No!" Ethan screamed, running to where she had been, but it was too late. He looked at Pogo, his anger boiling over. "You said I could choose." "I lied," Pogo said with a crooked smile. "But don't worry, Ethan. The show isn't over yet, and you are the final act." In the void, the laughter continued. Ethan was alone again as the stage and lights disappeared. He felt something being torn from him, not just his hope, but something deeper, as if his very essence was being erased. He looked around, but all he saw was the reflection of his own face, slowly transforming into that of a clown. "Now you understand." Pogo's voice echoed one last time. "The horror doesn't end, it just changes form. And Ethan, you are the next joke." Ethan was trapped in a darkness so absolute that he couldn't distinguish where the void ended and his own mind began. Pogo's voice still echoed, now softer, almost a constant whisper in the background, repeating words that blended into a macabre mantra. "The show must go on." He looked at his own hands, but something was wrong. His skin was pale, cracked, and his breath echoed as if it no longer belonged to his body. In a moment of pure horror, he realized he was becoming part of what he feared most. The paint stains appearing on his face, the mocking reflections in the mirrors. It was all a prelude. And then he saw it. Before him, a large frame appeared, like a circus mirror, but different from the others. This one showed a version of himself dressed as Pogo. The smeared makeup, The grotesque smile, the dark eyes, hungry for something Ethan couldn't name. The figure in the reflection extended, its hand to him as if inviting him to cross over. "You are the final act, Ethan," Pogo said, now present in flesh and blood beside him. "They need someone to laugh at, someone to fear, and who better than the one who started it all?" Ethan screamed, but the sound came out distorted, almost like an involuntary laugh. He fell to his knees, trying to fight against what he felt inside, a force pulling him down into the mirror, into his own reflection. Meanwhile, in the outside world, Chicago continued. The sounds of the streets, the city lights, and daily life went on unchanged, as if nothing happening to Ethan existed for others. But in a small park on the outskirts of the city, a low, sinister laugh echoed. Miguel woke up on a sidewalk, dazed. He didn't know how he had gotten out of the tent or exactly what had happened, but something inside him knew that nothing was truly resolved. He stood up unsteady, realizing he was holding something in his hand, a red balloon with the word "Smile" written on it. In the distance, a small group of children watched something on a rusty carousel. A tall, familiar figure spun slowly on the ride, dressed as a clown, with a smile that never changed. Miguel felt panic rise within him. "It can't be," he murmured, his feet instinctively moving backward. And then the horror was revealed. At the center of the carousel was Ethan, now unrecognizable. His skin was white as chalk, with splotches of black and red paint covering his face. The smile, frozen and grotesque, seemed to be a part of him, not painted on. His eyes, however, were empty, as if any trace of humanity had been erased. He looked directly at Miguel, although the gaze held no recognition. Ethan lifted a black balloon and released it into the air, while the laughter echoed once more. "The show goes on," said a voice in the background. Pogo's, or perhaps Ethan's own, distorted consciousness. Miguel ran, but the sound of the laughter followed him. In the following weeks, reports began to surface on obscure forums and local news about sightings of a strange clown in Chicago. He appeared in the most unexpected places, in security footage, reflections in store windows, or even in the dreams of people who swore they had never seen him before. Hannah and Tara were never found. Miguel, now obsessed with what had happened, lived in seclusion, collecting every small piece of information about the new Chicago clown. He knew that Ethan was no longer Ethan, but part of him believed that maybe there was a way to bring him back. The last time Miguel was seen, he was near the empty lot where it all began. A neighbor reported hearing laughter that night, followed by silence. The next morning, a single red balloon was found caught on a fence with the word "Smile" scrawled on it, and so the cycle continued. The show never ends. After all, are you ready to be the next attraction? Do you think you're safe now? If you enjoyed this chilling tale, prepare for more nightmares that will haunt you even after you turn off the light. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to never miss the next horror story. And remember, fear loves a good audience. But be careful. You never know when you'll be the star of the show until the next spectacle. Smile.